for arriving late. I'm not that great with the technical end of things. This is a growing edge. This is definitely a growing edge for me. And I need my young adults that I work with in the office here with me. So last time we gathered, we were beginning the COVID-19 virus conversations. We are in a whole different place this year now, or not this year, this month now. So I'd like to begin with a word of prayer, and then just hear from you, just to hear how things are going. I think that's probably a little bit more important than anything else we've got to say today. So the Lord be with you. Dear Lord, thank you for always being present with us. Thank you for people that are making decisions for us in this world, making good decisions to keep us healthy. We know that there are people that are sick, people that are going to be sick. I mean, we ask that you be with them and surround them with your love. We know that these church leaders that you have on the call with us today are dealing with all sorts of things in their congregations, in their communities, and we ask that you give them strength that they need, wisdom that they need, and also being able to think ahead, to strategize ahead when we come out of this COVID-19 virus time in our history. What will our congregations look like, and will we be ready? In your Son's name we pray, amen. Okay, so I can't hear anybody. This is going to drive me crazy, Todd. Can anybody hear me?
Yep, we hear you, and we can unmute everyone else as well.
Okay, let's unmute. We'll just go for it.
All right, they should be becoming unmuted right now.
Well, good morning. This is Deacon Andrew Moore. How you guys doing?
All right, so everybody's live, and people can control their own muting on their microphones if they choose to.
I want to start. What's that? Edmund Fitzgerald? Why do you? What's it for? What's it for?
Yeah.
All right, Rachel, you there?
Yep, I'm here. Yep.
All right, you're good to go.
Okay. Andrew, how is things in Texas going?
Yeah, things are going pretty well here. The two congregations that I work with have kind of yoked together with their ministries and are doing their live stream as one congregation. So our Sunday worship continues. We are shifting a lot of things through Zoom. I've started a children's Zoom worship service on Saturday mornings. That's been a lot of fun. People are getting used to the technology, kind of getting used to, doing things from home. Obviously, Holy Week was different, but, I am actually incredibly optimistic during this time that we are going to come out of this a lot stronger than we can imagine.
Right. I'm hearing that from a lot of people. There's a lot more connections that are happening that haven't happened in the past, and and a lot of people are asking questions about the church. So, Charlene, how about you? How are things going with you? Oops, she might not be there. Cindy? I'll just go through my list. If you got something to say, join in. Jennifer? Yep. Joel? Rebecca? Okay, I've tried to unmute everybody and have not been able to, Todd. So anyway, we'll just go ahead. Jennifer, thanks for saying yes, you can hear me. So we'll just go on with the conversation, and hopefully that will clear up in just a minute, because we definitely are going to want to talk with one another today. So our first chapter this week is on empathizing with today's young people. And interesting enough, when the ELCA symbol, the Synod Youth Ministry folks gathered last September, this was one of the two largest concerns. The other was key chain leadership, and where we scored the lowest in our church in regards to empathizing with young people today. I think youth directors and folks that work with young people tend to do a much better job of this than our older generations do. And so that's where we're going to talk a little bit about what empathizing means today, but also what are some things that you're doing in your congregations to help our older generations understand our younger generations. So empathy is feeling with. It is, imagine sitting, with a young person and just listening to what they have to say, celebrating who they are, grieving over issues going on in their lives. And then empathy is also understanding today's young people. There is some great research out there by Barna and by Pew on the different millennial generations. And I would challenge you in your congregations to even think about if there's a group of folks that are interested in understanding these generations, not only, of course, talking to them face to face, but also doing a little bit of study of some of the generalizations of these generations. I've found that it's super helpful and helps me understand them a little bit better, so that when I'm going into a conversation with a younger person, I have maybe a better question to ask. And yes, I'm admitting I'm 53, so I am one of those older generations. So there are three questions that young people are asking themselves. Fuller found that through their studies and theological reflection, they believe that these three questions are core to what young people, and actually all people, are asking. So the first is, who am I? And that has to do with identity. Where do I fit? And that has to do with purpose. And then what difference do I make? And this has to do with, where do I fit has to do with belonging and the community. And then the final question, what difference do I make, has to do with purpose. And, really and truly, I think at every single stage in our lives, we ask those questions. Who am I now? Where do I fit in? And am I making a difference now? In older generations, maybe they're not quite asked as much until a big milestone happens, like retirement. But I think that all along, our lives, people are asking those questions, but especially for young people, this is something that is just turning in their heart. One of the things that I do with youth, that I enjoy doing with youth, is doing the personality and gifts, spiritual gifts inventory. There's a curriculum, it's called Finding Your Fit. And it's really a helpful resource. It was created, and Todd helped me probably maybe 15 years ago. We had Janice Kais come and teach this course at the
Unmuted.
Anza one year.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But yeah, and I have continued to use that resource over and over because it helps youth and young people discover who they are, how they are created by God, and then gives you tools to help them understand ways that they can help serve in the church, but also think vocationally about what is God calling me to do in this world, not only as a church leader, but also as in their vocation as we understand it as Lutherans. So this is 25 years ago, 30 years ago, this would have been the normal track for life: high school, college, job, marriage, and then kids. And I have to admit, I fit right into this. How many of you did? Turn on your microphones and share if this looks familiar. God, we're just not getting the mics working, I don't believe, this time. I think for many of our older generations, this is the path that we expect our young people to, or our older generations expect our young people to follow. This is what they did and their parents did. Yet today, this is what it looks like. A young person could finish high school, they could take a year off, or they might go to college, they might travel, they might get a job, then go back to college. Some are living at home, some are living with the partner of their choosing, some are doing internships, some are doing the traditional marriage. I just heard of some friends of mine that are two couples that are going to be living together. You know, you would have never heard that, and possibly even buying a home together. And then last but not least, having kids again. But the manner in which our young people are doing life and their journey of life is so different than what our older generations expect. And really, truly, in some ways, adolescent has been extended so over, and what we would consider growing up is not maybe with marriage, a job, marriage, and kids. Our older generations would say, well, they just haven't grown up yet, but they really have. The thing sometimes this causes issues, and I've got a prime example. My mom is really, and she's 88, struggles with my children's decisions on relationships and living together. And it's become, in some ways, just a topic that she doesn't want to discuss and they don't want to discuss. And it's really put, well, it's just a problem in their relationship because they don't always understand each other or agree with one another. Does that sound familiar to any of you guys?
Yes, it does. I definitely
Kelsey, you were almost there. Go back.
Kelsey, try that again, Kelsey.
There we go. Can you hear me? There. Yeah, I definitely identify with the roundabout way of life, and that elders didn't necessarily understand it, of traveling abroad before starting a job and marriage and all that stuff. But it's the way that we kind of live now, and having that acceptance towards it. Saying that going to school doesn't always mean that you have a job in the end. You can go to school and study as much as you want to, but it doesn't always guarantee a job in the field that you want.
That's right. Yep. Yep. Anybody else willing to share?
I have a 24-year-old son, and so for me, I get to watch this playing out right in front of me. He is still living at home with his mom and grandma. He has a job. He did finish college. He's not in a hurry to really move into a career. He's not in a hurry to really move into a relationship. He's finding his own way, his own path. And I find myself just kind of having to really take a deep breath sometimes to say, you know what? He's doing a great job, and he is finding his way, and I just need to let him figure it out.
Right. So one of the things, and I've experienced it 3 times now, so it's just, so I can recommend this as something, a possibility for your congregation, is number one is on page 108 of the book. There's just a line of action to help folks think before they talk, is basically, and ask the questions of themselves first before they make a decision or share a concern about a young person. But anyway, but use that page 108, maybe rewrite it. That would be helpful for language for your congregation, and post it in a couple of places. Or if you're doing some growing young newsletter articles or snippets on social media somehow, maybe just consider using some of the ideas on page 108. But the other thing, when we can get back together, or maybe even online as an activity, is gather a panel of young people and other generations together and just begin asking questions. And ask everyone to listen, and then ask everyone to, and then so maybe have a panel of young people answer some questions about concerns or things that are going on in their lives, and then turn in it and letting the younger generations hear how older generations react to those very same questions. I'm thinking maybe even with Zoom today, it might be kind of a fun way of, or webinars or whatever we're using, Facebook Live, to really have some good conversations online. I always prefer the face-to-face, so you can watch physically with one another, but you know, we're getting pretty close these days with these webinars. The other thing that tends to happen recently is the labeling and stereotyping, and I have to admit it, sometimes I get aggravated with it too. In fact, even I've been stereotyped as a young person because I wore glasses, so they would say, oh, well, she can't see, and they would put me in the front of the class. Our generations today, Gen Zs and millennials in particular, are labeled because they're lazy, or they arrive late, or they're always on their phone, you know, not paying attention to the things around them. And so we need to make sure, those are hurtful remarks that we make, and we need to make sure that in our conversations with young people that We don't label them and actually affirm them, especially with our older generations. When we catch someone saying, well, you know, they're always on their phone, you know, never looking at the pastor during church, maybe say, well, maybe they're looking up a Bible verse, you know, and turning the conversation to a different way, using what we have to make this our relationship better and more affirming. So, any comments there? Okay, we'll move on. So here's a couple of ideas for action. So the first is getting everybody together and looking back at your teenage years or young person years, and I don't know what that event's going to be called, maybe even wearing your favorite outfit or bringing your favorite outfit that you wore, or bring a picture that represents who you were in high school or as a young person, and then being able to share that with the rest of the group. I think a lot of times when people realize that we all experience many of the same things as young people growing up in high school, there is greater understanding of one another. And then ask a young person to walk through the worship service in your building with you. What is working for them at their age and what's not, and what would help others connect better. Maybe it's visual kind of stuff. Maybe it's, I know there are still some congregations, including mine, that don't want to put a screen up, but maybe it is that screen. And then finally, the last thing is, another idea is to ask everyone in the congregation to learn the name of a young person, find out about them each week, and then next week find them again. Can you imagine if everybody knew each other and knew everybody's name, and turn that around too? Also challenge your young people to get to know older generations too as well. So any thoughts on those things?
Can you hear me? This
Yeah.
is Jennifer. Hi. So one of the things I've been very intentional about, I actually just left a position as an interim youth coordinator at a church, but one of the things I was very intentional about is having older members of the congregation share testimony and faith stories with the high school students. And so once a month, I would ask somebody to participate in that way. And it was really neat because sometimes I asked them specifically to think back about their high school years and talk about that in the process of talking about their faith journey. And it really opened up some really nice conversations and allowed the kids to really voice a lot of what was going on in their lives.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Thank you. Anybody else?
One of the things I've been using a lot in our congregations is Faith 5 as an opportunity to have some real intentional time together. And I think that doing a cross-gen Faith 5 group would be a wonderful way of developing those relationships and the power of having people hear each other's highs and lows and pray for one another and bless each other. So that's a tool that I have found extremely helpful for something like this.
Sure. Yep. That's a great idea. And, you know, actually you could even link up people today, social media wise, you know, I mean, there's just, even in this time of COVID-19 virus, even doing FaceTime with someone, you know, might be a pretty cool thing to do. My mom, who is, like I said, in her 80s, did FaceTime with us because of this, and we taught her how to do it, and lo and behold, she actually, I think, enjoyed it. So the connections that are made are really important, and it's going to help everyone understand one another a whole lot better. So in what ways is your congregation already empathizing with young people? And what gets in the way? Anybody got a thought there? And what are some shifts in your congregation that you know needs to be made?
Hi. This is Jennifer again. I think the congregation supports young people. I think it goes a long way to, I mean, the older generation goes a long way towards supporting mission trips and supporting activities. But I think the relational piece is missing.
Mm-hmm.
I think really, like you said, that suggestion of everybody knowing each other's names and getting to know each other. There are a small group of people that really make the effort, but I think that it could go a lot farther, I think.
Mm-hmm. There's an old program that's called AAA Adult, and it's there is, and I believe Vibrant Faith is the one that had that program. But the tenets were that adults were affirming, authentic, and available. And it was really a course just working with adults on helping them be authentic, affirming, and available, and giving them ideas. That might be another resource for you and for your congregation to be able to use, especially in regard to this topic of empathy and how to have conversations with younger people and what's important.
Thanks. Yeah, those are great suggestions.
The thing that I find,
okay. Go.
I was going to say, the thing that I find that gets in the way is the expectation that our older adults have that kids need to be at the church in order to be validated. And I hear a lot of, well, they're not here, they must not care. You know, there's a lot of judgment that happens by our older adults in our congregations who kind of come from that, you know, greatest generation mindset of you're in church every Sunday and that's how you show your faithfulness. And so they interpret the lack of attendance by our young people as them somehow being inauthentic or insincere, and sometimes even not worth the time to then reach out to. Rather than trying to understand how these kids' lives are complicated and busy, and not just judge them based on how often they show their face in the building. And I find that to be probably the biggest hurdle that I have encountered in bridging the generations in congregations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, this was the largest, or this was the biggest. This and the keychain leadership, giving the keys away, were the two biggest things that some of your church leaders saw as an issue in the church. So I think it's something that we definitely have to address. What are some other ways? I mean, Andrew, I mean, I'd love to hear what are other ways that we can help these generations get to know one another?
Well, one of the things that's important to our young people in developing trust and relationships with our older generations is are our adults, our older adults, willing to meet our young people where they are? and it's kind of almost this, the young people are waiting for the older people are waiting for the kids to show up in church, and the young people are waiting for the older adults to actually step outside of the building and meet them where they are in their lives. And there's this disconnect while both groups sort of stare at each other across this chasm.
Right, right. So you are welcome to share this story. Christ the King Lutheran Church in North Carolina. When the shootings were going on, particularly the one in Florida that happened, and young people were stepping out of their high school and protesting, the congregation shared a parking lot with the high school, and I believe they're in Cary, North Carolina. And so the church knew that the kids were going to be protesting, and so the people of the congregation met those high schoolers out in the parking lot and walked with them. And the pastor shared with me that the following Sunday they had more young people in their church than ever, because the church seemed to care about something that was important to them. So looking for those opportunities in your community, particularly right now with the COVID virus and things like that, things that are really important to these kids. I've recently seen everybody putting up their senior, pictures, and trying to honor and recognize your seniors that would have been graduating and walking and aren't now. The other thing that happens this month is all the proms. And what are ways that your congregation can lift up young people and I don't know, have a prom party online or something like that, and what does hosting look like for some folks, and what does going to the prom look like for others, but it goes, of course, a whole lot deeper than just, and will continue to go a whole lot deeper after we get finished with this time in our history. If you're okay, we'll move ahead with, does anybody have any other comments? We'll go ahead and we'll move ahead with taking Jesus seriously. And we're not going to spend as much time on this. A couple of years ago, Fuller Institute also wrote a book called Almost Christian. Kenda Creasy Dean was one of the authors of that book, and she talked about moralistic therapeutic deism. And it was really a bummer for many of us that had been working with youth ministry and doing programming for years and years, because basically the belief was that young people, if they were good moral people, that was good enough, that God did exist, that God was kind of over on top of everything, almost in a way, and wasn't really active in people's lives. And when they needed him to be active, all they had to do was call him up, just like on a phone call, rather than having a personal relationship with him and seeing him and being in prayer with him every day. The good news is since then, there have been congregations that have been taking Jesus seriously, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. So when you think about the way you hear young people in your congregations talk about their faith, what encourages you and what discourages you? I hear a lot from older generations. One of the discouragement is the lack of participation in, whatever the Christian education program is on Sunday morning. Andrew, that goes back to what you were saying too in regards to participation, that seeing them on a Sunday morning involved in a class. Does anyone else feel that way?
Well, I think it ties, for me, this is Todd, it ties back to the idea a little bit about accompaniment and allowing, not allowing, because that sounds, I don't know, condescending. I don't mean it that way, but partnering with young people. So I've got a guy in my congregation who came to see me. He was unhappy with some things. And one of the things he was unhappy with is that we have our 10th graders. One of the things that's part of the confirmation program is we ask them to find a life verse, a verse that has significance or meaning to them, and then one or two on a Sunday over the summer share that life verse, um, which can be pretty terrifying for a kid, to get up and do that. But we kind of do all sorts of stuff to try to coach them and walk them through that. And if they really can't do it, we don't make them. But almost all of them do it, and they're glad they do it. But this guy came in to talk to me, and he hated it, because he said these kids they're not public speakers. They're not good at this. Sometimes they mumble and they're hard to hear, and he said, I think this is just a waste of time and energy, and we shouldn't do it. And it was really well, it was a depressing conversation for me, actually. What I was trying to get him to understand was, it's not about you, Al. This isn't for you. This is an opportunity for kids to verbalize something and to express something. And I had a hard time with him, and I've had a couple other conversations with people, helping them realize that sometimes part of the deal is, if you're going to put young people and ask them to do something, to recognize that it doesn't have to look the way it would look if you did it or if I did it, or we just accept. Part of accepting is accepting what young people do and how they do things as well. And it just made, I mean, actually, it affirmed for me the need to kind of keep giving young people opportunities to articulate faith, and to find other ways to do that. There may or may not be public, but other ways that we can help them express what it is that they believe, even if it's not going to be the classic, small catechism answer, or theologically correct, or whatever it's going to be, but to give them space, to do that, and to have people hear them. I think that's the element too, because that by itself becomes affirming and welcoming. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I love about watching young people, and this is seeing the tattoos that they put on their bodies and what's important to them. And when you begin to start looking at pictures and ask stories, you see how faith is weaved into that expression of art on their bodies, and it's beautiful. Does anybody else have any other ways that you're encouraged by young people and how they talk about their faith?
Yeah, this is Joel talking. So we've just been doing a lot of our faith projects for confirmands, and a lot of those conversations have been about questions that they have about faith, or about scripture, about God. And so those have been some of the most encouraging things for me to explore and to talk with them about those questions.
Yeah, you don't have to always know the answer. It's just allowing the questions and the time, right? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think the answers aren't as important as taking those questions seriously.
Yeah. We are in the process of becoming a reconciled in faith congregation, reconciled in Christ. And as part of that, we had an open discussion with the kids about gender and identity issues. And I was really impressed by the depth of conversation and the way they brought their faith into their understanding of a sense of belonging for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Growing Young found a couple of distinctive characteristics that we should think about ourselves. So instead of talking about abstract beliefs, instead, really and truly, talking about Jesus and his stories and what he said to us and what does that mean for life today, was much more important for our young people, much more interesting. the next thing is less tied to formulas. Well, if you do this and you do this, then you're going to get to do this. And instead, more of the redemptive narrative of Jesus that that all are welcome and that all are saved is much more, or is something that our young people would prefer to be talking about. And then the last, which I find really interesting, is less about heaven and more about life here on earth and what that is like. And so, and I think that's especially a very generational conversation too, because our older generations are thinking about heaven, and and yet our younger people really want to talk about what life and what Jesus would be about here on earth, here and now. So, any comments there? Are you seeing that in your congregation?
I would say absolutely, yes.
Yeah, okay. So here's a couple of ideas for action. First of all, I think this is a great way to get your faith formation team or your Christian education team or whatever in your pastor, and other people that are involved, those folks that are concerned about, Andrew, like you said, the numbers, and who's showing up on Sunday mornings. Get them involved, study this particular chapter in the book, or give them a copy of it, and then ask them to come up with some ideas once they know what young people are looking for. So I think that's really important, is to get you don't have to do this one, because you've got some other experts in your congregation that can walk alongside you on this one, especially, I believe. The other thing is, think about the Bible studies. What would Jesus do and say today? And I'm sorry that I'm using that old 80s thing, what would Jesus do? But I mean, it's kind of pertinent to what our young people are saying. That's what they want to know. And then our young people love knowing what happened in the early church. And so learning about rituals and the seasons and the creeds and why we do what we do, using some of the ancient methods of prayer, and really teaching them why people did what they did, and then and practicing that today. Young people are energized by that. Other things, of course, is milestones and stepping stones, and why those times in our lives are important, and maybe lifting up a story of Jesus, whether it be Jesus in the temple, or Jesus being called. What are you being called to when you graduate from high school, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm sure many of you are already doing that, but that's just a good reminder to use those milestones, but also wrap Jesus in those milestones. And then finally, some studies on chronological studies. So historical things, why things happened in the order that they did. Also studying the early church and what it was like, that it wasn't perfect, and that there were issues, and Paul had a lot to say to the church. Our young people sometimes hear just the good stuff, and they don't hear, there were some stuff going on in the churches that wasn't always probably what Jesus would have wanted. And then finally doing a chronological study from Genesis to Revelation. and there was, and I think the Methodist Church has a great program. I think it's called Disciples. Is anybody familiar with that program? But anyway, it's a great resource, and there's videos and workbooks that go along with it. But if you've got some young people that are really wanting to get to study, it's a great resource that not only has some theologians on the videos, but experts and really good conversation, and starts from the beginning and goes to the end. Or I think there's some certain topics too as well. So what are other ways that that you're seeing your congregation helping young people discover Jesus? Just shout out. I know you guys are doing some things out there.
Well, our confirmation kids are invited to help out at the homeless shelter on a regular basis and participate with their families alongside other kids or alongside other members of the congregation.
Nice.
Being relatively new here to Texas, I'm still really at that kind of basic level of building some relationships with the kids here. But in my time when I was in South Carolina, probably the most powerful thing that I experienced for working with young people putting their faith into action was a program that we developed called GraceWorks.
Yep.
Which was a week-long intensive local mission activity that brought congregations together for worship, for leadership development and service in the local community. And I'm real excited that even though I'm not in South Carolina, GraceWorks is living on and actually has multiplied, and now there's GraceWorks in 2 parts of South Carolina. So I actually think that that's a really, what I have found to be is a very powerful model that our young people seem to really be responding to.
Mm-hmm. That service and mission in their community.
Yep.
Yeah. So living out their faith. Yep. Awesome. Anyone else? Todd, can you talk about your how your young people help with the food issues, the food shortages in your town in Owatonna?
Yeah, you're talking about the thing since the COVID virus deal. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that as well as just how the young people help stock and get ready for for some of their friends that have
Sure.
food.
Yeah, the Husky Pantry thing. Sure. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
still running right now. I'm sorry, I was just want to make sure I was knowing what you were asking about. The our congregation has taken on food insecurity as a fairly significant ministry piece, and one of the things in our community of 26,000, the town we live in, there's a semi-significant number of families we've discovered that are experiencing homelessness. I think our district identified 183 children in the school district altogether who are classified as homeless. It could mean some of them are couch hopping or staying with a friend or a relative or whatever. And I think around 30 at the high school that fit into that category. And it's really interesting. If you actually talk to the social workers at the school, they kind of have those numbers because they're working with them. But one of the things that we worked on, because our building is just a block away from the high school, and we already had a backpack program for one of the elementary schools. Different churches take on and sponsor an elementary school. So we have Wilson Elementary in there, the Wilson Wildcats. So we have the Wildcat Pantry. So families would come and pick up boxes of food for the weekend. But it was actually high school kids talking about when they became aware of these issues around food within their own school and trying to figure out what they can do. They were talking about it in the building, but they couldn't quite figure out the logistics or the space. So they kind of approached the church and said, can we do something like the Wildcat Pantry for the high school? And so they started the
Wow.
Husky Pantry. Um, and and it's actually not a youth thing. It's kind of the whole congregation's involved in it now, but it was really kind of youth that helped spark some of the conversations. But there's a pantry in the basement. And rather than a backpack program or a box program where like we package the food and families pick it up, like with elementary schools, they talked about the need for high school kids to be able to pick their own food because there's a certain amount of dignity in being able to choose what you eat. And so it's more of a traditional shelf. Kids can come through and pick things up. And at first, actually, we had a hard time getting people to come, even though it was being talked about at the school, but rather connected with the alternative high school, which is just another block away as well, but also Real Life, which is the program through Young Life in our community that focuses on kids at risk. And so they actually make it a part of their program to come to the Husky Pantry as a part of when they gather on a regular basis. So now there's high school kids coming in to access it. Yeah, the question mark for us has been, there's high school kids that want to help, which is great, but there's also a level of discomfort among the young people that are using the pantry when they come, and it's their peers who are serving them, because there's a certain amount of shame in coming in taking food out of a pantry, a perceived sense of shame. The shame, but it's and so we've kind of moved away from high school kids staffing the pantry because that becomes a piece that the young people that are making use of it are less comfortable with. So there's been a little bit of I wouldn't call it tension, but just a learning that we have to try to figure out what that looks like and what it means. But it's been a pretty cool thing.
But I would guess your high school students are, if they're recognizing someone that is needs a meal, is able to share the story in a way that a person would feel would want to come.
Right.
Though I mean, I can just only imagine that's happening in conversations in the hallway at school or on the sports field or whatever.
Well, we also have there's several social workers on staff at the high school, and one of them kind of works in this area, and she actually has this office that is a front entry area, and then her office is kind of behind a door behind that entry area. And that front area, she has food and a small refrigerator in there, and actually, and that's like immediate access. So kids can walk in and she can give them, here, have some granola bars, have some fruit, have some some milk in her little fridge. But it's interesting, it was actually the church that bought the refrigerator for her office. And then the church, we take the food from the Husky Pantry over there to her. So she's distributing it, and that becomes sort of the entry point for a lot of those kids. And then she's talking about it because she's done a great job building these relationships of trust. So she's able to say, hey, there's other stuff for your whole family. If you go over to Trinity, which is just a block away, you can access these pieces. So it's about relationships and harnessing that. And a lot of what she does, because she's working with that population on a regular basis, makes a huge difference. Right.
And I know your high school students are telling the story. I just know it.
Absolutely.
So they are sharing Jesus with their friends through the ministry of the church, even though they might not be actually hands-on with the ministry. I know they're talking about it. So does anybody else have anything, any ways that their young people are invited to put their faith into action? Well, we'll close. I thank you so much for all of you joining us today. Are there any other comments from these two chapters, or anything that we didn't discuss that you were like, this is really important, I wish Rachel would have talked about it? Okay, well, we will close for our time today. Let's close in prayer. Dear God, wow, what a world we are in now. We ask that you help us to be empathetic to our young people. Help us to sit beside them and have conversations with them and listen to them, especially in these days of COVID-19 virus. We need one another more than ever. And as we are socially distanced from one another, conversations and relationships are even more important today. And especially when we're having those conversations, help us not to forget that the reason that we gather and the reason that we do the things that we do is because of Jesus. Help us to help our young people share Jesus with those that they meet, and to put their faith into action, and to help them discover careers and that help them live the Jesus that they love. And help us all be better leaders, and help our congregations as we help our congregations grow young. Thank you for this day. Thank you for everyone online. Keep them safe and keep them well. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. And